use that energy you've got. You've got it. It's an attribute. You need to use it. But there will come a time when you're older and you're training or your life is busy because of your job or your wife or whatever's happening. Some of those won't be as available to you, but that shouldn't stop you from training. That's the thing that irks me, is when I hear people say, oh, I can't compete anymore because I did this, or I can't train anymore because my fill in the blank hurts. I'm like, man, that's the time that jiu-jitsu should be part of your life, because it teaches you how to work with those deficits. A guy asked me in Brazil one time, he said, how do you train with these young guys? Because I'm training with these practitioners who are 14, 15, 16, 18, 25, 30, 35, 40. To me, they're all young. And I said, look, it's not conditioning. It's not my conditioning that makes me able to do this. It's decisions.
Welcome back to the BJJ Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Ford. My guest today is a 4th degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's been practicing martial arts for 54 years. He opened his martial arts school in Nashville, Tennessee in 1992, and he began his training in Jiu-Jitsu in 1994, directly under Master Rickson Gracie. As a result, he's one of the first people to bring Jiu-Jitsu to the East Coast of the United States. He's also taught around the world and received his black belt under Rickson in 2009. Off the mats, Eric actually has built a long career in music as a producer, a musician, and a songwriter. He's written a number of songs, played in hit records in both the U.S. and Brazil, and he won 3 Latin Grammy Awards for his work with Brazilian artists. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be joined today by a friend of mine, Eric Silver. How are you today, Eric?
Hey, Ryan. Glad to be here with you finally.
Of course, it's great to have you here, man. For the people that don't know, Eric, you and I trained together at Damian Maya's in Sao Paulo since like 2019. That's where you and I first met. And we trained together really up until you recently left back to Tennessee. So we were kind of the 2 permanent gringos at the academy. So I got to know you pretty well. But for the people that don't know your story, tell us about where you're from originally and what life was like before you got involved in martial arts.
I'm from North Carolina, Central North Carolina. And, I was growing up in a time when everybody was seeing martial arts for the first time, and Bruce Lee movies and the Kung Fu television series. And honestly, the only thing I wanted to do was to try to learn Kung Fu. And, that was all we knew about. And at the time, the only martial art that existed in our town was judo, which was taught by a guy from North Africa named Claude Chauvigny. So my mom enlisted me there, got me enrolled when I was 8. And, it seemed like, oh, it's just judo. It's not Kung Fu. But I was really into it immediately. I was very, very, I don't know why, but I felt at home because there was no one in my family that had done contact sports or martial arts. And, I was a small kid. I definitely was getting picked on and things like that at that time. And, judo seemed like, okay, it'll do for now. And I did judo for a few years until I was about 10 or 11, and then got into karate when I was about 15 years old. And from that point on, I never stopped. But I never realized in retrospect how important the judo training was, because when I finally got into jiu-jitsu, so many things, aspects of it felt familiar to me, falling, being on the ground, just the whole aspect of wrestling with another person's body, that had become kind of second nature because I was so young when I started. And the basics of judo really never left me. I think when I was in Brazil, when we were training there, some of the very high level judo people that came in and trained with us, it sort of surprised me how much of the feeling came back to me, and that I wasn't as out of place as I might have been. I mean, these guys were clearly way better than me, like Eustachio, who's a world-class Olympic judo coach. I wouldn't stand a chance against him, but I didn't feel as out of place. And I felt like, I could adequately defend sometimes. I didn't have the power or the technique to deal with a guy like that, but I didn't feel underwater. And like so many people who came up in the time that I did, I mean, we were tough. The people that did martial arts in the 70s, if our technique wasn't to the level of technique today, our heart and our spirit was, because people were utilizing more their aggression, their killer instinct, their strength, all that stuff. I didn't have killer instincts, honestly, but I had a desire to do really well. So I wasn't one to give up easily. We were used to getting beat up pretty bad in class. Now in judo as a kid, they were nice to us. But by the time I got into karate, it wasn't a great, like, nice, comfortable environment. We were all friends, but the fighting part of it was rough, and at that time, I don't want to like date myself being a dinosaur, but pads at that time were a new thing. Sparring pads were fairly new in the 70s. That's when they were just beginning to get incorporated into martial arts. And our instructor said, you can have them, but we can't use them in class. If you want to use them on your own time. But when we spar, we're sparring bare knuckle. So it was interesting. And when I got into jiu-jitsu, I remember one of the things that one of the first people I trained with said, you're tough. You've done martial arts before, haven't you? And I said, oh yeah, my whole life. Because I had been training for about 22 years before I started doing jiu-jitsu with Rickson. And I have to say that, my first seminar was close to where you're from in Atlanta at what became Jacare's school with Rickson. And I wasn't particularly interested in going because I had no idea what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was, the Gracie family. I'd never heard of it. A friend of mine had heard about it and said, let's go. So we went completely in the dark about what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was like. And little did I know that I'm walking into the floor, onto a floor with the best guy in the history of the art. So, same stories you hear all the time. The end of the class, everybody got to roll with him for as long as it took for him to submit you, which in my case was less than 10 seconds, literally. I thought I had a chance, but, it's like you're getting put in a situation with a bear and you don't know that it's a bear. So, I watched him getting everybody one by one. And of course, technically, we weren't a challenge for him. Of course. People say, oh, well, they didn't have the same level. But he was using, 5% of his potential to get all of us, to tap all of us. And some of the people had some experience. But, it wasn't just the case that you were getting tapped. It's that you were getting defeated and you couldn't understand how or why, what happened. Because Rickson was never hard and super explosive and powerful with us. It was very smooth. And it was just like you're moving, you think you're fine, and suddenly you're in the straitjacket and you can't move, and then you're tapping. So immediately when the seminar was over, I went up, we talked, I told him that I worked in Brazil quite a bit, and he was like, oh, that's really cool. And I said, how do I train with you? I want to know about this. And he gave me a business card. I spoke to Kim, his wife at the time. And, the first chance I had, I got on a plane, went to LA, became the first or second representative of the association. One of the first people to get blue belt and purple. Because I don't know how to explain it. Anyone who went through this knows exactly what I'm talking about, because it is not that you wasted your time prior. Everything we learned prior had value. And Rickson always told me, don't throw away the stuff you have. You've got good techniques. You're good on your feet. You're fast. Your footwork is really smooth because of karate. We learned footwork, which I trained incidentally in Japan and Brazil in karate prior to jiu-jitsu. So, I've dedicated a lot of time, a lot of my life. And that was one of the things that impressed me with him, was that he would never say, oh gosh, you spent 20 years of your life doing something you could have been doing jiu-jitsu. He always made it important, the time that we had spent training. And I think maybe an advantage that I had over some people is that I could put that in perspective and go, yeah, that stuff we did, the judo I did was valid, the striking was valid, and kicking, and now the jiu-jitsu is valid, and I need to make everything better. And I tell my karate students, which I still teach karate, that my karate improved 100% after I started doing jiu-jitsu. Because at the time, we thought of everything above the waist. Hands, kicks for us above the waist. You know, we were all, of course, we wanted to kick the head just because we were young. But I didn't have a concept of my hips and my feet, especially my feet. I have very weak feet. I was born with a little issue with my feet, so my ankles aren't very strong. But when I was trained with Rickson, and he taught me how to make pressure on my feet and my knees to keep more stability in the lower half of my body, my karate improved immensely in the functionality of it. And what I like to say is that I teach functional martial arts. You know, if I teach a strike in jiu-jitsu, it's still jiu-jitsu. And if I teach a takedown in karate, it's karate. You know, all the arts, the old masters weren't limited to say, we can't do a takedown because we're doing karate. In fact, the master of our style, which is called Wado-Ryu, did nothing but jiu-jitsu until his early 30s. And then he added the strikes because he thought, hey, this is cool. Now that you have somebody down, you can finish with a strike. So our style of karate has quite a few techniques that are designed to strike following a takedown, which is kind of unusual because you have to adapt your stances to punch down as opposed to punching forward. So for me, it really dovetailed really nicely. I still believe that in all practicality and all functionality, a strike well executed is going to change the whole outcome. A poorly executed strike is going to do nothing but make somebody mad or hurt yourself. But a well executed strike, it may be done. I mean, and we're seeing that a lot in MMA, how much jiu-jitsu guys are incorporating striking into their games, which is, I don't know, I would say sometimes as much as 50, 60%. Because other than Damien, I haven't seen anyone really big in MMA where the jiu-jitsu was the foundation, not the follow-up. With Damien, you know, he is able to close the gap and take things to the ground. His strikes are not something to be comfortable with. His strikes are powerful, but still jiu-jitsu is his foundation. And I think with a lot of other guys who got in from jiu-jitsu, striking became a bigger part of their game.
For the younger listeners that are out there tuning in, and for people that didn't train jiu-jitsu back in the day, they might not understand the shift in the landscape that happened in martial arts when the UFC and when jiu-jitsu exploded on the scene in the U.S. So obviously you're someone that was front and center, being both a traditional martial artist and being a training around at that time in jiu-jitsu. So you kind of got to see this big landscape shift that happened. Do you remember among the traditional martial arts crowd, people seeming nervous or worried about the presence of jiu-jitsu in the UFC? Did it seem to be something that was really resonating with everybody? What do you remember about the time that the UFC and Hoist exploded on the scene?
There was a real curiosity about it. And at the same time, there was also a little bit of a resistance to it because, you know, in the time that I was training growing up, the idea was martial arts is something you learn for yourself. You learn it for self-defense, but it's not something you use for entertainment or for violence. And, you know, obviously the UFC was more violent in the beginning. It's still violent now. It's a fight. I mean, boxing is violent. But there was a resistance to that sort of glorification of violence, of beating people up to show that you can beat them up, as opposed to defending yourself because you had to defend yourself. I mean, if you go way back to like early Shotokan karate, Funakoshi didn't allow the students to spar. He didn't want them to make a light of fighting. But, you know, obviously that didn't stick. But I had a lot of people who would come to me and ask about it. What is it like? Or, does the arm lock, does it really hurt? Or, just any number of questions, or discounting that there's a cage. Oh, well, they're trapped. They can't move around. Yet there was all kinds of upheaval about it. And there's always upheaval with any type of change. I mean, there was upheaval when Uber came around, because it's new. You don't know who's driving you. Are they trained? It's a stranger coming and picking you up. And then you say, yeah, well, the taxi's a stranger too. So any type of change like that is going to come with a little bit of doubt. And of course, then people would wonder, well, is it only Royce who's able to do that type of thing? And then the people in the know are saying, you should see Rickson. It's even greater ability than Royce. So yeah, there was a lot of almost confusion about this thing. I myself questioned a little bit, the use of the cage. And until later in my mind, I thought, well, I mean, there's a wall behind me right now. There's a wall behind you. Limitations in space are real. So yeah, there was a lot of questioning about, was it valid? Was it real? Other thing in Brazil at the time, there was a lot of bad publicity around fighters and jiu-jitsu fighters, and particularly vale tudo fighters, because of people getting in fights in the beach, getting in fights in a bar, public places. I mean, the Gracie in action, if you watch those videos, it's fights all over the place, in the school, and some of them were in the street, some were on the beach. And I think the Americanization of that fighting image had to change things a little bit. Even Rickson would say, we couldn't live in America and then go fight somebody on the beach to show that we were superior, because we'd go to jail. And, or in the parking lot or whatever, and people are going to be filming you and then sending it to their lawyer. So, things were smoothed off around the edges somewhat. And then, of course, in UFC, weight divisions came in and lots of rules. UFC is still not no holds barred. There's lots of rules, good rules that help protect people. So, I mean, I went to UFC 3, I believe, when Royce, I think, was his last appearance. And there was still an element of kind of ancient Rome, at that time, because it was bloody, and you could still kick people on the head on the floor, and elbow them in the spine, and all that stuff. So it did change. And I tell you, I highly respect the guys from back then, the Dan Severns and Don Fries. I mean, who went in there. They didn't get to know that much about their opponent. They didn't get to choose, the size. They didn't have to make weight. They didn't have someone to stop them if the person, punched them in the groin or whatever. It was wild. And those guys, I mean, that's a whole other era of people that I think had the courage and the willpower to go and do that type of thing. There were the bad boys of the time, like Tank Abbott, and there was also people who were very, upstanding and continued, like Lyoto Machida, that showed lots and lots of respect in the ring. That's always made me happy. People like him and Damien that show a great deal of respect for their opponents, seem to be able to make careers without a lot of showboating, without a lot of trash talking. I mean, the public loved that. Muhammad Ali learned that the public liked that, and it works for people. I just happen to be a person who's personally more understated. I like to see the action show the results, and it's changed a lot. I mean, you hear it's become one of the largest grossing sports in the United States, maybe in the world. So, going back to like the early UFCs, I was at the third UFC, for example, which was in Charlotte. It was rough back then. I mean, it was violent. You could elbow somebody in the back of the neck, punch them in the groin, pull their hair. If they had hair, I never had that problem. Well, I did.
Depends on genetics. Yeah.
Well, what era? Yeah. I actually shaved my head after someone stepped on my long hair on the mat and a big chunk ripped out. And I was like, well, we're done.
It's enough of that.
Um,
Yeah.
but there was an attitude shift because in the beginning, it really was like human cockfighting. It had that Roman Empire, throw the guy to the lions. And now it's a more technical thing. People understand the rules better. People understand the objectives better. But I personally always love seeing the Damian Mayas, the Lyoto Machidas, the fighters who show a lot of respect for their opponent, because everybody worked hard to get there. Everybody knows the other person can win. And, while I was living in Brazil, I had a lot of opportunities to train with the fight nerds. And of course, I was like the grandfather of the bunch, but I was really honored that they always allowed me to train with them. And I was very impressed with their level of integrity and discipline. If I went in at 8 a.m, people were already there sweating. They'd already been there working out. I'd run into guys there that I knew I was going to see later that day at Damian's school, and they were there training already. Of course, so was I. But the level of respect that they had for their art, for their choice of career. In fact, whenever Wagner Moura taught class, who was Damian's jiu-jitsu coach in the UFC, for those that don't know, every class ends with a period of appreciation. And if it's 10 people, 30 people, 40 people, each person in the circle, in the class, explains what they're grateful about at that moment. And I thought that was just an incredible way to end a class of martial arts. You're in there fighting, and then you appreciate what you have positive in your life. Because, being a pro fighter is no different than being an actor, being a musician. There's huge competition, huge letdown, huge disappointments. You work hard and then it's over in seconds. It'd be the same way for me in my career as a music writer. I might be asked to write a piece of music for a movie, and I work for 2 weeks and they hear it and say no, and it's over. Just like walking in the ring and getting knocked out. So you have to have techniques to help you survive the downs, which you are going to have. There's very few Khabibs that are going to leave their career undefeated, walk away without a loss. And my karate instructor used to say something that really stuck with me, which is learn to lose like a champion. It's easy to win. It's easy to be number one. But when you're not, if you don't have a true training ethic, you got nothing to land on. It's going to tear you up to not be the best or not have won that day. And I think that's, for me, when I charge a student to teach them martial arts, is to help them live a better life. I have very few students that have gone on to fight professionally. I have coached guys who have been pros, have been in UFC, but the majority are working class people or students. And to me, if I'm taking their money to teach them and they're not learning how to deal with their regular life when they're not in a fight and they're not in a competition, I'm robbing them. 99.999% of their lives is not fighting. But they should be using their training, their jiu-jitsu training, 99.999% of their lives when they're not fighting. It teaches you to be a more efficient person.
Obviously, like I was saying before, a lot of the people that train jiu-jitsu today might not realize the difference in the scene and what it was like compared to before. I think now there's very much the mantra of like everyone's welcome and jiu-jitsu for everybody. And there's a lot of structure. There's a lot of organization. Whereas before it was very much more closely tied to those NHB, Vale Tudo, MMA style fights and training. There was a very tight marriage between the jiu-jitsu scene and the fighting scene back then. And one thing that I think is really interesting for people that weren't around during that time to hear about is the idea of challenge matches. And this is something that Rickson himself had several incredible stories of people that took the Gracie challenge and fought him to compare their style against his. Obviously, anyone that opened a school that said Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or whatever on the sign outside could expect that someone somewhere might show up and want to issue a challenge. Is that something that you ever dealt with as a school owner in Nashville from the time you opened the doors in 92?
Oh yeah. Yep. I was lucky too that in the beginning, when I started teaching, a lot of the guys that I taught, a lot of the people that I taught were very tough. I mean, Jiu-Jitsu has had kind of a magnetism to attract strong people, big people who I think are curious about it. They want to see, can a small guy really overpower me? Can a little guy, or like in my case, I'm not that big and I'm older. Can that person give me a challenge? And, yeah, we dealt with that. And I had a lot of conversations with Rickson about that because it was something that psychologically I didn't want to get into that culture. Um, Here we are in Nashville, Tennessee, and it at the time was still a fairly small sort of family town, and I want to be brought down into sort of like a trench of fight club type of thing. Like you said, in Brazil, people used to say to me, it's a good thing you don't have cauliflower ear, because if you try to go into a nice restaurant, they probably won't let you in. I got some scars, but mine's scarred on the back, oddly enough. So still look amazing.
My ears are super flexible, man. I think I'm like immune to it. My brother just got his first one though. His left ear's all swollen up now. So maybe, I don't know, maybe I can get it, but I swear, I think it has to do with the type of your ear you have, I think. But
Hoyler's never seemed to get me in his ears, but mine happened at a training with Rickson. I was in someone's guard and they were flailing and their heel just went pop and hit me in the ear. And on the way home from the seminar, one of my students said, "Hey, your ear's kind of big." And I was like, "Ah, ha, ha, yeah, right." And I looked in the mirror and almost crashed the car. Like, what? What is happening? Like I've got a blueberry in my ear. But
yeah, I've gotten like the blueberry looking thing, but then it goes away in a few days. So I don't know. I think my body just absorbs it somehow. I don't know.
Well, my ex-wife worked for a dermatologist. So I got a bunch of free trainings.
Nice, nice.
So yeah, going back to that, I mean, I had an amazing student named Bob Hillis, and he had as much martial arts training as I had prior to jiu-jitsu. He had wrestling, and he had been in the Army and wrestled, collegiately. Derek Reynolds, who is a student of mine still, Derek is a third-degree black belt, has been with me this year for 30 years. And Derek's not a small person. He's used to bench about 500, about 6'1". So I always had a nice little fence, if needed. Some of my students might say, "Hey, well, let's roll, come roll with us." Yeah, I had a lot of strong guys, and that's one of the reasons that I sort of never was afraid to roll with really big people, except Bull Shaw. Did you know Bull Shaw in
Yeah, oh
Atlanta?
yeah, I know Bull. Yeah, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, Bull's a legend.
6'7", up in
Yeah,
the 300s and 400s. That was a
yeah,
little scary. That
monster.
was like a full eclipse.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, I mean, we had people come to the school, sometimes sort of surprise you, but you can suddenly figure out, oh, they're trying to test and see what's going on. Or sometimes they would call me in advance and say, "Hey, I heard about some of your guys. I want to come over and train." But the innuendo, the message was, they better be ready. And, back then I had the only school, basically. I mean, my students were coming from Kentucky, which, for those of you who don't know, it was an hour to hour and a half drive. I had students from East Tennessee that had a 2-hour drive one way. So I had students that came from Alabama, from Ohio. So we had a great selection of people. And I always told my students, I said, just don't hurt anybody. You can definitely do what's necessary to show that you know what you're doing to win. But first and foremost, don't get hurt. Don't allow anybody to hurt you during training. It's self-defense based. And so, I've had that happen to me a few times where someone wouldn't stop cross-facing me, in the nose or in the kidney, hitting in the kidney, or trying to heel hook me when we weren't supposed to be doing that. And I do my best, to maintain my composure, but I admit a couple of times I've lost my patience. And I'm not proud of that. I mean, even if you end up making someone tap, to me, this is about learning how to self-control. The thing about jiu-jitsu, I always say to people, is it has like an attenuator. If I'm doing karate, you don't know for 100% if I hit you and control it, would that have put you out? Would that have taken you down? We don't know. But when somebody taps, we know it worked. That's what worked. So, it got to a point at one point where I was getting some mild threats from another school. People were saying, Rickson Gracie's promoting Eric Silver because Eric pays him all this money and, gives him favor. And anyone that's ever trained with Rickson would know that money won't get you belts. See, I can count on one hand the number of people I know that have gotten their black belts from him. Literally, I think I was seventh or eighth. And I spoke to him and I said, this is what's going on. And I'm uncomfortable with it because we're not here for that. Our school is here to be a place to learn the martial arts. We're not going to turn into a challenge club, a fight club. But, people saw that on YouTube. They saw that was happening. And a couple of my students said, you know what, why don't we go pay them a visit? And I said, no, let's not do that. And Rickson, I remember clearly, he said to me, look, I've done that my whole life. Don't lower yourself to that level, because if you do, you're going to be like me. You won't be able to go to the bathroom without getting a call that somebody's at your school wanting to challenge you. And, I said, yeah, I kind of know what you mean. And he said, think about it like this. If you win, the next one's going to come. If you lose, they're all going to say you weren't any good and you could lose. And I said, that's true too. But I just really did not want to turn into like, a fight room. I was trying to do the exact opposite, for us to become a safe place. That's what I wanted everyone to know. You can come and learn real martial arts, real fighting skills, but you're not going to get hurt. You're not going to get beat up. Not to say that didn't happen sometimes, because people are human and their emotions get the best of them. And sometimes people get carried away. But a good example was like when Derek started with me. Derek is the one I mentioned, who's my senior, 3rd degree black belt, 6'1", built like a linebacker. And his first day in class, a small guy, I think he was a white belt, came from Ralph Gracie's school, caught him in a collar choke. Derek passed out. The hardest thing I've ever done in my life in jiu-jitsu was trying to turn a 250-pound guy over to his back to shake his legs to get him to wake up. So, there's always those trials by fire. But, even Rickson, after he had that last fight in the dojo with, name slips my mind all of a sudden, the guy that came from Japan, I was at Rickson's house right after that happened, and he told me the story. And I always picked my class last in the day. So I would go do a private class at 5:00 till about 6, because that way there was nobody after me. And then he and I would have dinner and chat and stuff, while I was out in LA. So we were waiting to have dinner, and he told me the story, and he said, do you want to see it? I've got it on tape. And I said, man, I get it. I said, I totally understand what happened, and I believe you. There was something about it, because he wasn't all that happy about it. He was a little bit, at least at the time, the way he explained to me, he said, I just don't want to do that anymore. And he said, when I hit him in the nose the last time, he said, that sound if you take a raw egg and drop it and it goes, he said, that's kind of the sound it made. And he said, I kind of was like, I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't making me a more elevated person, a more spiritual person, or whatever. And, he said, I just don't want to live like that anymore. And I said, I feel you. I'd like for things not to have to get to that level myself. But it did, those kind of things did happen in Tennessee. I even had students that got involved in some of that, but I tried to stay away from it. I feel like your performance has to do the talking. When I went to Brazil, uh, I'd been working in Brazil since 1990. But when you and I met, which was almost 20 years later, I'd been training the whole time. But that's when I finally decided to join a school, which was Vila da Luta with Damien. And, I realized I don't know anybody here. And for the first time in my life, I was just a student, because from the time I started doing jiu-jitsu, I was a teacher. As soon as I started training jiu-jitsu, I started putting it into my karate class so that I'd have people to train with. And I remember I went to Rickson one day, I said, I'm just a blue belt. What can I offer? And he said, never forget, the one-eyed general is the leader of the blind army. And I said, okay, well, I got one eye.
No, I appreciate you sharing this perspective, though, because like I said, like for a lot of people that train jiu-jitsu nowadays, this might sound like crazy that there's this, the representatives globally of the art was a family in Brazil, the Gracie family, and they issued a challenge saying, hey, if you doubt our style, come into a school. And, if you beat one of us, you get a bunch of money, and, test yourself against the people that are representing us. And so, the reality was, if you were training at a jiu-jitsu school in the 90s, there was a very real possibility that, a Taekwondo guy or a karate guy or someone might come in and say, hey, put up or shut up, let's do this, So
a lot of people that went into those too, they weren't just untrained fighters. Hugo Duarte, the one that has that famous fight with Rickson on the beach, and you can sort of see it, but the camera's shaking all over the place. And, he was trained. And even Zulu, he wasn't a martial artist, but he was a street fighter. I mean, these guys were tough guys. They didn't have rules. They didn't respect that you weren't gonna gouge them in the eye or pull their hair or whatever. I mean, it was just whatever happened. And so, interestingly, when I trained with Rickson, he was very eloquent about those things. And he said, if you're in this position doing the Americana, turn your head and keep your mouth closed. Someone will try to gouge you in the eye, or they'll get their finger in your mouth. So those were very specific, and I still make those specifics when I'm teaching the self-defense moves. If you're in a clinch and your head is in the front, keep your eyes down, keep your mouth closed tightly so that nobody can reach in there. And that's real fighting. I mean, it may seem sometimes, I'll tell stories to my students and it sounds like I'm 100 years old making up stories from the Old West, but really crazy stuff happens and has happened. I've never put it past a human being under pressure will snap and do things that they never thought they would do. It's just the survival instinct, But just to complete what I was saying, when I went into Vila da Luta was, I was walking into a school as a nobody. I mean, a new person. I wasn't the teacher. I wasn't in charge anymore. And which incidentally is something that I loved, because I could go in there and just train, but I had never been in a situation where I was just one of the students. Now, quickly, there was kind of this curiosity about me, because I wasn't just a gringo, I wasn't just a foreign guy. I was a foreign guy that was given a black belt from Rickson Gracie, which I'm sure that word got around. And quickly, people wanted to train with me because they wanted to feel, well, what does that feel like? What is that like when you train with one of those guys? Is it just a myth? And I think that what people were sort of thrown off by is that the way we were taught, the way we were insisted on training by Elio or by Rickson was, we don't use force, we don't use a lot of speed and explosions, but you try to do methodical movements, just like if it was a chess game. You can think about it, you make your move, but the whole time staying very heavy, staying really tight, always staying really connected. And interestingly, the older guys seem to really get it. They'd be like, wow, that's cool. I love it. I've never felt this kind of jiu-jitsu. The younger guys would react more like, hey man, come on, go, let's go. And I go, I'm going. I'm full on right now. If I have to move fast, all of a sudden I will, but I don't see any need to right now. I only trained with Elio just a little bit, but I had friends like Chris Saunders who did quite a bit, and if things got too rowdy, too intense, he would say, stop it. This is jujitsu. We're not fighting. This is wrestling. We're doing jujitsu. And one of the things I noticed early on with Rickson that I didn't do is that some of the guys who were training would, use more strength and power. And I always take this assumption, I'm not weak, but I always assume that I'm weaker than the person I'm training with. I just take that as like a starting point. I'm weaker than Ryan, so I need to be sneakier. I need to be more technical. And then I have some reserve, if I need the strength or when I need the strength, I have somewhere to go. So the younger guys that I would train with in Brazil would often feel like I was holding back or I wasn't engaging. And for me, I'm engaged the whole time. The second I touch hands and go to a grip or whatever, the first thing that happens, I'm engaged. I'm engaging my core. I'm engaging my base. That's what I work on the most. So it's not backing out of the fight. It's entering into the fight, but it's a different entrance. So as I said, the older guys, Valdir and Wagner and the guys that some of the really great older guys from the school totally got it. And they would feel it and go, oh, I love it. I love it. This is great. Because it's a game of millimeters and dissecting the techniques and the angles. And over time, I would imagine that some of the younger people probably would be like, not as excited to roll with me because I'm not going to go 100 miles an hour for long. And some of the older guys love it because they know it's going to be like a really technical match. And when I started training at Wagner's home, he had his own school set up at his house. He'd say, go roll with Eric. I want you to feel it because it's different. I try to make it extremely heavy so that the moves you're doing, they're good, they're valid, but they're not going to affect me as much because I'm trying to play my game. I'm not trying to play your game. Most people, I feel like, make the mistake of trying to play the other person's game and maybe intercept it instead of really having a strong base in their game. And I asked Damien one time, did it feel different to him, like when we rolled? And he said, oh, yeah. He said, when I roll with the guys from Rickson and even from Hoyler, it's much more methodical. It's much more like micromanagement. So there's like a space here and you fill the space, or there's a pressure here and you meet the pressure. And it's funny because I hadn't heard it put into words, but that's how it feels to me. Physically feels like that. It's not so much that I'm going to go blow up a bomb and blow your fence up, but I'm going to slowly dig under it, slowly pull the foundation out, slowly until you go, hey, my fence isn't here. My defense, or in this case, my defense is getting weak. I think it's a tough philosophy for a lot of people to understand, but not to keep going back to Rickson, but I asked him one time, should I ever explode? Do I ever just go for it? And he said, of course. He said, if you're going to push a car, you can't start pushing a car gently. You got to go and give it everything you've got to get it in motion, but then you don't have to keep pushing that hard to keep it moving. So when you need to explode, when you need to create a distance or close distance, explode, but then hold it. You don't have to keep just boom, 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 boom. Now, I will say this, that students that I have that are younger, or like my son who's 18, I'll tell him, if you've got the energy, go for it, use it, because you can right now. I'm 62. I know I don't look a day over 61, but I'm 62. Just like Rickson encouraged me, it said, you have fast foot movements. Use it. You can use that in jiu-jitsu when you're standing. I tell my son, use that energy you've got. You've got it. It's an attribute. You need to use it. But there will come a time when you're older and you're training or your life is busy because of your job or your wife or whatever's happening. And some of those won't be as available to you, but that shouldn't stop you from training. That's the thing that irks me, is when I hear people say, oh, I can't compete anymore because I did this, or I can't train anymore because my fill in the blank hurts. I'm like, man, that's the time that jiu-jitsu should be part of your life because it teaches you how to work with those deficits. And so now at this point in my life, I'm not going to use cardio as my uh, key factor or strength because I have two messed up shoulders and low back hurts, but that's not going to stop me from training. That's impetus for me to train, but I have to learn to use other tools. So, a guy asked me in Brazil one time, he said, how do you train with these young guys? Because I'm training with these, you know, practitioners who are 14, 15, 16, 18, 25, 30, 35, 40. To me, they're all young. The 40-year-old guys think they're old, but I'm still a lot older than them. And I said, look, it's not conditioning. It's not my conditioning that makes me able to do this. It's decisions. I like to call it decisioning instead of conditioning. I've made the decision I'm going to train. I've made the decision I'm going to be active in this match. I've made the decision I'm going to give you a fight. So whether or not I win, whether or not I make you tap or they make me tap is irrelevant. What's important to me is that I'm there. I'm in it. I'm participating. My mind is made up. I'm there to do jiu-jitsu. And I feel like that's a huge element that makes us able to succeed in life or not, is you make the decision to be involved. The one thing that gets on my nerves a little bit is the amount of information that's out there right now regarding jiu-jitsu, regarding fighting, and everyone's an expert. Everyone's got an instructional blog or an opinions. The biggest thing that has gotten me where I am in life, wherever that is experiences. You get out, you live, you travel. As you know, you live in another country. I lived in another country. You meet people, you interact with people, you hear people's stories, you hear people's thoughts, you feel other people's games, you feel their jiu-jitsu. And that's where you get the experience. That's where you become an expert, not by reading blogs or, what did John Danaher say or what did Eric Silver say. You find out. I mean, of course, we have to have teachers. I mean, we're going to be martial arts and MMA wouldn't be where it is now without an amazing groundwork that was set by everybody in the last umpteen years. But I've had students come in and say, well, what do you think of this? I saw this the other day. So-and-so says this, or said that Marcelo Garcia's technique is this, or I've seen people say, I was at a seminar and I learned this technique watching Rickson and it's this. And what I'm seeing them do isn't the way Rickson does it. So I feel like if you get too dependent on, I'm going to do this diet because, the bulletproof diet, that's the new one. No, I'm going to do the Gracie diet. Life doesn't work like that. You have to be involved. And the more you put yourself out into life, whether it's in jiu-jitsu or social situations or learning about the world, that's where you get good. That's where you become experienced, become a master. You become a red belt of life as opposed to depending on other people's opinions about what they've experienced. Because everybody has a tilt on it. They have their personal tilt. So if you learn my jiu-jitsu, you're learning my point of view, but I'm never going to stop you from training with Ryan or training with Damien or training with whoever, because I may learn from you.
Eric, there's something you said earlier that I'd like to zoom in on, if you don't mind. You talked about preserving energy and the idea of keeping energy in the tank and not wasting energy. What are some of the easiest ways that students can do that in live practice?
The most obvious and least utilized, and I sound like a broken record, is breathing. Breathing work. I do them in my class. Sometimes I'll work everybody sort of to exhaustion, and then I'll teach them breathing techniques to recover. Sometimes we'll do something silly, like one guy lay down and stack people on top, so everyone's in side control on top of each other, and the one on the bottom is kind of suffering. But I teach them how to do controlled diaphragmatic breathing so that they can continue to breathe while they have that much stress and pressure on them. Sometimes it's as simple as just reminding them during a roll, say, Ryan, you're not breathing. I'll notice that somebody's just either out of breath or they're red or they're breathing really hard. And I'll say, stop, stop. A guy asked me once, like, how much pressure should I use, let's say, when I'm choking someone? He was a very strong guy. I said, like if you're doing a chin up and you just pull yourself up to the bar and then don't move, you just hold yourself. That's about as much pressure as you need. It's as much as you need to support the activity that you're doing. And, relaxing when training it's not easy. If I'm rolling with Damien, there's a lot of tension in the activity, but it's also a controlled amount of tension. So somebody might try to do, let's say, a rear naked choke, and they don't realize they're squeezing their legs so hard that they're not actually putting as much pressure on the neck as they could be because they're afraid they're going to lose the opponent. So they're crushing with their legs when that's not necessary. I learned this initially, at least in my mind, from a karate teacher I had from Japan. And he said, when you punch, you got to have a reserve because you may get to the end of your strike and it's not far enough. So you need enough reserve in your body or your hip that you can continue and arrive to the target. Rickson had a similar approach, that if I'm going to do a rear naked choke or a guillotine, I shouldn't burn out all my energy in the process getting to it. But at the point where it's time to apply the submission, now put that energy in there. But if it doesn't work, don't keep squeezing, and then you're burnt out. We all know from competition, your arms burn out, your legs burn out, your wrists get exhausted, your grips rather. So, there are technical approaches. Sometimes instead of grips, you can use bent wrists, which is even stronger. Sometimes instead of using full grips, you can use half grips where you're more focused on your pinky or your index finger. This can greatly reduce fatigue. But I really think it's a lot of it's a mental attitude that you have to remember while you're rolling. This is going to go on. If it's a 10-minute round or if it's an 8-minute round, like I said, someone 17 or 20 or 25 may have the cardio to just do that the whole time. But I think it's definitely that's got a timestamp on it that you won't be able to do that forever. And I'm in no way saying, it's all flow rolling. Not at all. There are times with students of mine and instructors that I have where I think, today I'm going to go for it. As soon as we tap hands, I try to mow them down, just try to bulldoze straight over the top. That's an approach. But, then one day you run into Bull Shaw or you run into my student Derek. You can't bulldoze those guys. You have to have a plan B. One thing that Rickson Gracie said once that I think is very important is that all positions are positions. So mount is not the only position you should be effective at. You should be effective at being mounted. Side control is not the only position. You need to be effective and comfortable on the bottom of side control. And I think that's something a lot of people avoid. It's like, get out of that position, get out of that position. I train someone to be comfortable in that position. Like, Ryan, lay down, I'm going to mount you, and all I want you to do is stay comfortable there. Don't get out. Now, that's a whole different level. When you get that under your belt, you really frustrate your opponents because that's what happens with me a lot. I let my training partner get all the positions. And then they're going, he's really comfortable. I'm very uncomfortable. In fact, I was rolling with a friend in Brazil who's about 6'2", and I was not feeling real good, a little injured. At that time, I was training 10, 11 times a week, and I was a little burned out. So he ends up in sort of a north-south position, and I just relax and start focusing on my breathing, turn my chin a little bit, and basically still. And he says, "Professor?" And I'm like, He goes, "Professor." I go, "Yeah." "Are you okay?" I go, "Yeah, I'm fine." It's like, "Oh, I thought you died." It's like you didn't move. And I said, "Because I can't move right now. I'm totally fine right here, and go for it. Do whatever you want to do. But right now, with this guy's size and weight, I can't move. I will, because eventually he's going to realize it's not working and then switch, and then I'll switch. But it's like, what is it? Lord, give me the power change the things
Yeah.
that I can and recognize the things I can't. And that was one I couldn't change. So, you know, that's another thing that I think you have to really include in your game is patience. But I knew that, going back to your question about conserving, was when he got tired and realized it wasn't going to work, he has to move on. And once he moves on, I'll move. But I was comfortable enough in that position. So I think people should train a lot the unfavorable positions. I always say, okay, we have 4 positions: back, mount, guard, and side. Put yourself in both of those a lot, especially in the undesirable side. I remember Huron did a seminar at our school, and he would just say, okay, which one do you want? And nobody could do anything. He was so comfortable, and he's like, go, do it. And sometimes he'd even give you the thing to tap, the Americana or whatever. He'd say, why aren't you doing it? Because the person was so disoriented as to why they couldn't do anything to him that they would miss the obvious, even when he was giving them a chance. And I remember about a year ago, maybe a year and a half, he went to Damien's school. I was working at the time, so I was out of town. And he rolled with quite a few guys at the school. And the next day when I was talking to the guys he rolled with, it was like they'd seen a ghost. They were like, I don't understand what happened. He was just relaxed all the time and you couldn't do anything. And he'd tap you and then he was just like chill. And it's like he's doing another art. And I said, no, he's doing jiu-jitsu. That's kind of what it's the goal. But it felt really odd to them to be so unable to do the things that they were used to with resistance, And I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about traditional jiu-jitsu, Gracie jiu-jitsu. And I feel like in sort of, I don't know if I wouldn't say jealousy, but maybe lack of understanding, people will say not nice things about the Gracie practitioners or the older Gracie family. And I'm telling you, I've trained with lots of people, lots of big people, from older competitors like Salo Ribeiro, Marcelo Garcia, Damien, Caio Borralho, and the older guys, like say the old guard. I mean, because Halleck and Huron and Henner, they're not old, but the abilities, like, don't knock it until you have experienced it, because it's super high level, super pure jiu-jitsu. And there was someone that had commented recently, oh, Rickson ability nowadays, if you had his best abilities would be a purple belt. Don't say, someone that says that kind of thing has not experienced it, should not be talking about it because they haven't experienced it. And that is a gross overstatement, is not strong enough to say how wrong that is. And, and I don't say that out of blind loyalty to the family. In some ways, I'm kind of part of the Gracie family. Rickson and I go way back. Huron and I, Halleck and I, were very good friends. But there's an ability that comes from having been in that your entire life, from the time you were born, to having great genetics, to having great teachers. Huron, Helson, all these guys are still bad boys. These are still tough guys. Are they going to be at the same level as Mika Galvão? No. I mean, that just doesn't happen when life makes our bodies get a little less functional over time. But the general skill level and knowledge, it's very, very high. And I would highly suggest to people, to not judge something that you've never experienced or haven't felt.
Obviously, if you come from a family that has been doing the art, if your grandfather's been doing the art since he was in his early 20s or whatever, and then carrying it on from there, and the grandkids are all doing it in diapers, those people are going to have some pretty solid knowledge for sure. Eric, I want to talk a little technique with you here, man. Obviously, your game is very much centered around your half guard. That's something I noticed rolling with you. You have a very reliable and effective half guard that you use very well. At what point in your training did the half guard become a staple of your game?
I'll be honest with you. It wasn't a plan. When I was training, daily at at Damien's school, which became Escuela Damien Maya. As I mentioned earlier, it was the first time where I'm just another guy on the floor. And suddenly I'm rolling with people who are competing on a very regular basis. As you know, these guys are in tournaments every 6 to 8 weeks. Yeah. And the class that we were doing was 4 tournaments. I mean, the first time I went into that class was an accident. I thought I was going to another class, and I was like, uh-oh, what have I got myself into?
Yeah, there's definitely a vibe for that. That 10 a.m. competition class has a vibe for sure.
Yeah, it's like the hamster wheel, except that there's 100 people in the hamster wheel all on top of each other. And, I was, funny thing, I was 58, if I'm not mistaken, the first time I went in that class. And I was so exhausted. I went home. We didn't live far from the school. I laid down and said to my wife, I don't feel good. I don't think I've trained this hard ever. And it was like a challenge to myself. Can I go back? Because, they have classes that are less strenuous. And then, Damien said to me, hey, if you want to come into that class, you're welcome. But if you get tired or if it's too much, just rest, just sit off to the side or whatever. Well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to feel like the old guy sitting on the side of the room and everybody going, oh, look at the cute old bald guy. So I made it a challenge to myself. And I said, by the time I'm 60, I'm going to feel good in that class. I gave myself 2 years to feel better and to feel more up to the challenge. And ironically, I was in class on my 60th birthday, and I remembered thinking, I feel good. I feel strong. I feel ready, even after class was over. Well, back to your question, it's like, at first I'm thinking, I need to be true to technique. I need to be true to my training. I need to be true to the way I have had ingrained in me, to train, to perform jiu-jitsu by Rickson. Incidentally, it was 15, 16 years with him before he gave me my black belt. So I feel like I need to be a good representative of what this is about. But I also realized that, okay, all things being equal, if I'm training against me or someone like me, it's one thing. I'm now training against people, they're not 20 years younger than me. Some of these guys are 30 and 40 years younger than me, and they're trying to get me. Well, I guess I need to try too. I need to try to get them. They're not my students. So, in my mind, and it seems like a long time, 2 years to say it took me to get through this change. But we're talking about a guy with 30 years of training suddenly having to morph into a whole other headspace, which is competition, score, submit, whatever, sweep, take down with regularity against people who are a third of your age and sometimes less or more. So, I'm comfortable training. Like, as I said earlier, I'm not too freaked out about getting into some position that's not the one I wanted. But I suddenly thought, I've got to do better. I've got to be a little bit more aggressive, or maybe if not aggressive, more determined and more focused and more solid in my positions. And the guys there were using a lot, a screamer grip under the neck and arm, shoulder pressure. It was starting to really, really, really bother my jaw. It was starting to click. I had to go to a doctor, see a person about that to see if something had happened to my jaw. Probably did. But what I realized was happening a lot is I use a technique that is, I call it it's a double lockdown on the leg. And if you guys, are kind enough to get the instructional, you'll see it in detail. But it's something that I started doing. No one taught it to me. It was just at the time that I learned the fundamental of that, everybody did half guard as a figure 4. So they put their knee behind their foot behind their knee and squeezed hard. At some point in my training, I started, instead of doing that, I would wrap my leg over and then put my second leg back to the inside and under their ankle. and the original ankle would go under their calf or Achilles. And we jokingly called that Nashville West because I live on the west side of Nashville. So I started using that Nashville West because my legs are pretty short, that I realized, number one, they could almost never pull their leg out. It hurt, like, to try to pull it out. And secondly, if I extend my legs, once I have the double lockdown, it pulls them down, back down towards my feet. So I can take that pressure off of my cheek. Or I'll take my free hand and try to make a little shield just to keep that pressure off. Because, I'm training with these monsters down there who are passing my guard, or at least passing half of my guard. But I seem to, very rarely, I couldn't get the half guard, get my inside leg in. And I'll tell you a very funny story about this is that I started doing this a long time ago, my Nashville West. And Eddie Bravo was here in Nashville teaching a seminar that I went to, did one or two. And then sometime later, I went to another seminar that he did. I don't remember where it was, but he was doing something like that with his legs, but I'd never seen it. I did it, but I'd never actually seen it done by another person. And I was looking at his legs and I'm like, what is he doing exactly? So when they took a break in the seminar, I said, hey, can you show me exactly what you're doing with your legs on that half guard? And he said, dude, you showed me that in Nashville. And I said, I did? I don't remember that. He said, yeah, we were training at Nashville MMA and you showed me that. I said, wow, well, there you go. I haven't seen someone do that before, so it didn't register with me looking at someone do it, what it looked like. So, that became for me a very dependable technique. Now, as a practitioner, I have this goal, which is to not depend on anything 100%. So when I was about a purple belt, I started realizing I wasn't passing guard very well because I like foot locks. So I would get up in someone's guard, break the guard, jump up and get a foot lock. And I I realized I'm not passing guard anymore. I'm going to stop doing foot locks. I need to pass guard. So in the same way, I'd kind of tried to avoid using that Nashville West all the time because I'm becoming like too dependent on it. But then I started realizing, hey, these guys are doing competitive jiu-jitsu. I'm getting my jaw smashed and, leaving class and my neck hurts. I need to do what works. So I started really going to that and being a little more focused on it, but then looking for the submissions. So, the submissions that I can get from that usually is a straight collar choke, or I can work one leg back in to butterfly guard, or if the person tries to extend their body to kind of take the pressure off, I can invert, roll it over. There are a couple of ways to defeat it. You figured it out immediately the first time you and I rolled together, which is to switch your body to the complete opposite side. And you were actually the first person that ever did it on me exactly the way I teach people to get out of it.
Oh, really? Wow.
And I was like, wow, you did exactly what it works to get out of that. Maybe I'll go into detail on that on the next video because I don't want everybody to know. I'll lose my secret.
What I do, I just stepped back to reversed half guard. Is that what I did?
No, you switched. You hugged my neck with your opposite arm and you rolled over to the other side of my body and pedaled your foot out.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, yeah.
And that's exactly what I teach, and no one does it. Nobody's ever. You were the first.
What do people usually do?
So,
what do people usually respond with?
They try to base up. They try to put their hands on my chest and base up and get real high.
I could see that, yeah.
So that I can't reach their collar to choke.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which works, but I will honestly, sometimes the time runs out and they're stuck. I've used that with some really high level people, and they've said to me, wow, that's really rough. Like, I've never had that done to me before. But if their defense is good, it can sort of make things slow down. Now, what Damien does is he goes under my neck or under the neck, makes a palm to palm grip, puts his face on the other side and squeezes. And it's so uncomfortable that I usually have to open my leg to try to get full guard again, or at least squirm to get that pressure off my neck. So he and I were discussing that one day, and I said, now you've created a problem for me. I don't know how to take that pressure off. That's incredible. He's incredibly strong. So then he was helping me figure it out, and he said, I think you need to start rocking your hips left and right to take my base a little bit, and then hopefully he'll have to open his hands to base out. That's the thing I love about jiu-jitsu, modern jiu-jitsu, is that we help each other figure it out and go to different new levels. But yeah, most people will try to base up very high to make their collar. So what I tend to do in that situation is, instead of just keeping my legs crossed, I lift my legs way up in the air, and it makes the person fall head toward me. It's a very interesting game. Someone left a comment on the BJJ Fanatics site that said, I've seen a lot of half guard games. I've never seen this one before. And I thought, yeah, that's cool. I mean, there's definitely, 30 years playing a game, you're going to come up with some things. And I hope to do another series, because there's a few other tricks, that I have in the arsenal that I just realized over time, very effective, that I didn't learn from anybody. They just, came to me from my body style. But like I said, it really surprised me when you did the exact defense and got out. And I was thinking to myself, this is awesome, because you did it and it worked. And I always tell everybody it'll work, but nobody ever does it.
Well, I appreciate that.
I was like, wow.
I appreciate that.
No, it surprised me, but it really, in a funny way, it made me really happy, because I realized I was telling people the truth. If you do that, you can get out.
That's awesome. That's super cool. I appreciate you sharing that with me. There's a lot of people listening, Eric, that are, advancing in age or dealing with recurring injuries that are forcing them to find adjustments in their game. For people that are in that boat, half guards obviously seems like a great option. For people out there that never played half guard, that might be at a point in their life now where they need to start playing half guard, where do you typically recommend they should start? Like what should be their go-to thing to begin getting comfortable in the position during rolling?
That's a good question. The trick is to learn to people move around inside your techniques. So I start in a full guard, and then loosen my legs enough to where the person feels like they can pass. And the thing that I work on, if the person is passing to my right, which would be his left, I'm constantly working on slipping in my right leg between his during the pass. I learned this theory years ago. I had a student named Wilson Barros, or a friend who trained with us from Brazil, very good competitor. He let me think I was passing his guard one day. He closed his half guard and choked me out. When I woke up, I said, what happened? I didn't see it coming. And then that became a key technique that I use a lot, which is to essentially open your guard enough that the person feels comfortable to pass. They start the pass. You get one collar, close your legs. They try to complete the pass, and then you complete the choke. So that was the basis of how I learned to use this kind of double lockdown. I allow the person to pass, and you have to do it with a partner who works with you. It can't be somebody who's just trying to constantly beat you, but someone who will work to pass your guard. You start trying to work in your inside hook, and then close your half guard. Do that over and over and over, and allow them to build up how much intensity they use in trying to pass your guard. But I mean, I've gotten to a point myself, Hank Quillen, who's another instructor of mine, probably can catch that consistently 85% of the time, catch that half guard while the person's attempting the pass. But you got to do a lot of repetition. Just, let someone try to pass and then slide your leg in. And I don't know how much sense this will make sitting down, but it's not just sliding your leg across. Your hook has to come in down and slightly up, down and slightly up. So you're catching their leg right at your ankle and then boop, slide in.
Well, guys, listen, if you guys are interested in learning, improving your half guard and learning this particular form of lockdown that Eric does from half guard, he's got an instructional he just filmed with us, and it's really interesting. It's also very digestible. It's a shorter instructional, but lots of really great details in that 30 minutes. It's called Half Guard Lockdown and Follow Up, and it's available right now at bjjfanatics.com. So make sure you guys go check it out. Eric, in closing, man, what are some major goals you have for 2025? What are some things you hope to do this year?
We're working on growing the school right now. I was in Brazil for the better part of 10 years. The school was fully functioning the whole time. But during that 10 years, I wasn't present as much. I feel like my training grew a lot in the training I did with Damien, with the fight nerds. And so I'm incorporating a lot of the modern techniques and strategies that I picked up while I was in Brazil. Now I'm also going to have a shoulder repair. I have many, many years of damage that I've had with actually both shoulders, but the left one in particular has a completely separated supraspinatus, the biggest rotator cuff. So have to have that repair done this year. So my biggest goal is going to be getting through that and keeping all the cards on the table, while that goes on. But, we invite people to come and see us. Luckily, Nashville's a popular place. We get a lot of visitors, but love to have more. But primarily that's a big one. I knew that over the years it was coming. It had been torn for a long time, and not just from jiu-jitsu, just life situations, falls on the ice, things like that. So time to pay the piper and, again, making a decision to, I'm one of the very rare people that has a fully torn rotator cuff and yet full range of motion. My arm goes anywhere I want it to go. But this is more to avoid arthritis and further damage later in life. So I'm, going to take care of it this year. We never fully recovered after COVID from, the loss of students and whatnot. So we're really working to grow. We're very close to Vanderbilt University. So we get a lot of transient students that are in while they're in college and then move on when they're graduated. So, right now it's basically, I'm still reassimilating myself to life in Nashville in the U.S., getting used to speaking English all the time again. I have a student from Brazil in my class, and sometimes I have to ask him how to say something in English that I literally cannot remember because my wife and kids are all Brazilian, and so in the house we speak mainly Portuguese. So yeah, but mainly, these physical challenges. I used to brag and say I was the only person from my era that hadn't had a surgery related to martial arts, so I'm now going to join the club.
Nice. Well, man, I hope the surgery goes smooth. I'm sure it will, and I wish you the very best with your school and all the growth of your team, man.
Yeah. Thank you. It's great to talk to you. When I met you in Brazil, it was like a breath of fresh air. I had not had a home and not had a place to train in many years, especially in Brazil, and it just felt like a load came off my chest. I went in there and trained. We sat outside, talked for a couple hours after class. And it's something that I highly advise, your listeners, those out there, take care of yourself because it's a wonderful experience to have throughout your life. I don't train thinking that I'm older than the other guys. I trained as one of the guys, one of the people in my class. I have no intentions of that changing anytime soon or slowing down. So I advise, take care of yourself, take care of your injuries, wear mouthpiece, tap when it's unbearable, and you can have a very, very long and beautiful life of martial arts.
Well, folks, unfortunately, we're fresh out of time. Eric, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, man. I appreciate you taking the time to be here today and sharing your experiences with us. You've been training for a really long time and teaching for a really long time. So it's always great to pick the brains of people like yourself. So I'd love to have you back in the future. And thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much.
For anyone out there that wants to keep up with Eric, it's easy to do so. He's active on social media. You can find him by the name of his school. It's Zenshin Dojo Nashville. That's on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. His website is zenshindojonashville.com. If you guys are ever traveling through Tennessee and you're going near Nashville, drop in and get some training with him. He's got a great school with a great group of people. Also, guys, in the fall, Damian Maya is going to be coming to do a seminar at his academy. He usually does that every year at Eric's school. So keep your eyes peeled to the social media for that announcement for when exactly that's going to be. If you guys can't make it to Nashville, you can learn from Eric anywhere in the world here at BJJ Fanatics. His instructional that he just wrapped up with us is called Half Guard Lockdown and Follow-Up. That's what we discussed today in detail. It's a good digestible instructional too. It's about 30 minutes total, but some real great gems for anyone that's looking to improve your half guard and also to use this really unique version of lockdown that he uses from there. So check that out at bjjfanatics.com. And that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. I really appreciate you tuning in. Please stay tuned for the next episode of the BJJ Fanatics podcast.